there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday, January 19th. Here is some of what we're talking about tonight. Democrats have spent months trying to pass voting rights legislation. That culminates tonight in a vote that seems all but certain to fail. So, what's next for the president's agenda? We're keeping an eye on Capitol Hill, and we'll dig into his news conference today. He seemed to suggest some new strategies 1 year into his term.
I'm going to be out on the road a lot, making the case around the country with my colleagues who are up for re-election and others, making the case of what we did do and what we want to do.
Then what will the president's agenda mean for education, and how do we get struggling students back on track? The incoming superintendent in Los Angeles, Alberto Carvalho, joins us ahead. And we'll show you two new ways that historic women of color are getting recognition in popular culture, from the coins in our pockets to the toys on our shelves. It's been a busy day and a busy night in Washington today. Almost scared my floor director because I was running back and forth between my laptop because there's a lot to talk about this evening. President Biden, as you may know, held a news conference for nearly 2 hours to cap off his first year in office. You may have watched that here on NBC News Now. We'll have more on that later, but let's begin on Capitol Hill. You're looking live at the Senate floor as Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock is speaking on day 2 of the debate over that voting rights legislation we've been talking so much about. Any minute, they are expected to begin voting on cloture. Technical term, here's what cloture means. Each of the 2 voting rights bills needs 60 votes to pass the Senate. That means Democrats would need 10 Republicans to support them. That is support they don't have. So Democrats are going to hold a vote to try to get past this with a simple majority, just the Democrats. Now, this vote for cloture is expected to fail, but then the Democrats plan to ask for a vote on a motion to change the Senate rules. That rule change would set up a so-called talking filibuster just for these voting rights bills. It wouldn't change the overall rules of the Senate, just for these 2. And this is the old school filibuster. Each senator would get 2 chances to speak for or against the bills, basically limited only by their breath and the bathroom. Now, the unlimited talking filibuster has not always been the most productive way to get things done. So it was changed to the filibuster as we know it today back in 1975. Now, Democratic Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have made it very clear that they do not support tonight's proposal. Here is Senator Manchin speaking earlier this evening.
The United States Senate has never in 233 years been able to end debate on legislation with a simple majority vote. Allowing one party to exert complete control in the Senate with only a simple majority will only pour fuel on a fire of political whiplash. Eliminating the filibuster would be the easy way out. It wasn't meant to be easy. I cannot support such a perilous course for this nation when elected leaders are sent to Washington to unite our country, not to divide our country.
Now, I want to be clear on what you just saw, because we need to fact-check something from the senator's remarks. That blue and yellow statement on the poster behind him is wrong. Not by much, but it's wrong nonetheless. Look at it again. The United States Senate has never been able to end debate with a simple majority. Actually, it has. They've done so on lower court presidential nominations. So that poster is incorrect. But Senator Manchin's remarks applying to simple majorities ending debate on legislation, that is true for legislation, like the legislation before the Senate tonight. And that is where we pick up on Capitol Hill with NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell, who's been watching what's going on this evening. Leanne, I think it is still safe to say that after the Senate rules vote, that there's no real clear path for this talking filibuster to succeed. It looks at least like everything is going to fail tonight. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly how it looks, Joshua. And the reason is because you just laid it out. Senator Joe Manchin gave a floor speech saying what he's been saying over and over to reporters in the hallways and in statements for the past several months, really, that he doesn't support changing Senate rules with just Democrats changing the rules. He wants a bipartisan rule change if it's to happen. And he doesn't want to get rid of that 60-vote threshold either. He says it paves the way for bipartisanship, something that that most Democrats disagree with. Senator Kyrsten Sinema is the other senator who is not going to vote to change the Senate rules. She did not give a speech on the Senate floor today, and she doesn't plan to. But ultimately, all 48 Democrats who aren't Joe Manchin and aren't Kyrsten Sinema are going to support this rules change, but that's not enough. They need all 50, Joshua.
So what happens, presuming that these bills go the way that they appear to go, to these measures? Do Democrats go back to the drawing board? Do they move on to other stuff? What's the next step?
Well, Democrats say that they're going to continue to fight for voting rights. What that means and what form that takes, I'm not quite sure, because until they either find 10 Republican senators to support them on voting rights legislation, or until they convince Senators Manchin and Sinema to change the Senate rules in order to pass voting rights legislation, everything is stuck. And that has been what is so frustrating for so many progressives, civil rights groups, and some Americans who say that Democrats have not done enough. But ultimately, the numbers aren't with them, the math isn't with them, and they don't really have a path forward.
In terms of that path forward, Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, was among the senators who spoke tonight. Here's part of what she said. Watch.
And as I look at the measure that we have before us, I'm not convinced that we're there yet. I'm not convinced that we're there yet with the product that we have. I think that we need to do everything that we possibly can to avoid further polarizing voting rights and election reforms. It may be too late. I don't know. It may be just too late, but I think we have to try.
Leanne, what about that? Her saying, I think it may be too late, but we have to try. Does that mean that there might be a path forward for some kind of bipartisan legislation, or is Senator Murkowski basically one of the only Republicans who feels that way?
Yeah, she's an anomaly in the Senate, among the Senate Republicans. She is someone who supports the John Lewis Voting Rights Act legislation. She doesn't vote the Freedom to Vote Act, the more comprehensive bill, but she has been engaged with her Democratic senators, and so perhaps Senator Murkowski, there's an opening with her, but she and Democrats would have to find 9 more Republicans in order for anything to pass. Now, Murkowski sounds like she wants to continue those negotiations. There's a few other Republican senators who seem willing to do so, but it is a very long road, especially since Republican leadership is adamantly opposed to this, and I don't see that happening in an election year as well, Joshua.
All right, thank you, Leanne. That's NBC's Leanne Caldwell starting us off tonight from Capitol Hill. Much appreciated. Now let's step back from the Senate deliberations over voting rights out of Washington. Going to the polls could be quite different in some states this year. According to the Brennan Center, last year, 19 states enacted 34 restrictive voting laws. You see those states marked on the map. They include Georgia, Florida, Indiana, and Texas. Now officials in Texas say their state does not have enough voter registration forms to meet all the requests. The Secretary of State's office says supply chain issues have made it harder and more expensive to get the paper for the forms. So the office is limiting each group's request to 1,000 or 2,000 forms each. That drew fire from some groups who plan to do targeted registration drives, including for new U.S. citizens. So if there is a path forward for voting rights legislation, what might that be? Last night, we spoke to a Republican strategist on that possibility. Now let's hear from a Democrat considered moderate in his party. Today, former Democratic Senator Doug Jones of Alabama joined a group of former Senate moderates. They expressed support for changing Senate rules. Senator Jones wrote, quote, "The signers of this op-ed are not in accord on whether to eliminate the procedural mechanism of the filibuster entirely. We do agree, however, that meaningful reform to Senate rules is necessary if the filibuster is to continue and if the Senate is to properly function, especially to protect free and fair elections," unquote. Doug Jones joins us now. Senator, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Joshua. Thank you.
So my understanding is that you don't want to get rid of the filibuster entirely. What do you see as the value of the filibuster at this point? I have to admit, I would love to be able to have the latitude to just send an email to the head of the network and say, hey, I don't like the program we're doing today. I think we should all just stay home until I decide that I like it. I don't think that would go very far. Why should senators be able to do that?
Well, look, let's go back a little bit and look at the purpose of the filibuster. The filibuster is being abused right now. It is too easy. It is too simple. It is just simply an obstructionist tool. The filibuster was designed as a vote to end debate. It was designed to give the parties a chance to talk and to let the minority have some influence, not just to be obstructionist. If you can hang on to some form of rule that will give the minority, the party, the opportunity to have some meaningful amendments and meaningful voice in any major legislation, then I don't think that that's a bad thing. The problem that we've got now is the filibuster that is being debated now and being used now is not what the filibuster was intended to do. Rules that are at least being kicked around would go back to what they call the talking filibuster. Make the party obstructing hold the floor. Take the votes. Make sure that the party that is obstructing can hold that. That gives people time to talk. It gives folks time. And that's what happened in the old days. When Robert Byrd, Senator Manchin's mentor, was the majority leader, he changed the filibuster rules. So those are the kind of reforms I think could be enacted to get the Senate functioning, to get the Senate talking, that would actually increase the bipartisanship rather than divide it.
How do you get bipartisanship in a Congress where Republicans have made it very, very clear they do not want to work with Democrats? They hope the Democrats fail. They can't wait to see the Democrats crash and burn, and where only a handful of Republicans seem willing to even entertain the idea of talking out a bill at all. I mean, how do you make a filibuster work in that kind of political environment?
I think you change the rules the way I just said. I think it takes one thing first, though. You have to recognize that in order for the filibuster to be a functioning rule, to do the things that it's designed to do, there's got to be some good faith on the part of the minority. Again, I go back. Look at what happened in so many of the pieces of legislation, including the Voting Rights Act, when Everett Dirksen worked with President Johnson and others, Mike Mansfield, the majority leader, to get that passed with Republican support. There were concessions.
Well, but I think you're talking about a different kind of party. I mean, when the Voting Rights Act of '65 passed, Republicans had very strong. Well, when it passed, Republicans did indeed have very strong support. I believe there was only one Senate Republican who voted against the Voting Rights Act ultimately. But if you can't even get Republicans to decide to come to the table, then what's the good of the filibuster?
That's my point, though. When you don't have a good faith minority, which we don't right now, change these rules and force that minority to hold that floor and hold up the American public's work, hold up the work of the Senate over democracy, over fighting democracy. Put that burden on them rather than the way it is now. You just put something on the floor, people phone in the votes, they take a vote and they move on to the next thing. Make the minority come to the table. That's what the changes in the rules would do, Joshua. And force them to have a little bit of good faith. That's the only way to do it. And I want to say a couple things, too. This is not the first time where people wanted to eliminate the filibuster. Donald Trump held the presidency in both houses of Congress. He wanted to eliminate the filibuster, and thank God it didn't happen during that time. We've got to be very careful as we change rules because things are going to change. The idea, though, that we stop, Democrats need to just start winning elections. If we can win elections, we would not have a problem like this.
Right now, we're looking at Republican Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, who's speaking on the Senate floor ahead of some votes related to both the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, neither of which is expected to advance either directly on a vote on the merits of the bills or on a measure that would alter the filibuster rules to require a talking filibuster rather than the nonverbal filibuster, which we have now. Sir, I wonder what you think, before I have to let you go, is the path forward for voting rights. If these two bills do indeed fail tonight, which it seems like they will, do you think the bills should be salvaged? Should they be broken up? Should Democrats and Republicans go at it a different way? Or is now maybe just not the time politically where anything can get passed? Is now even the right moment to try to get something through Congress? What do you think the next step should be before we go?
I just don't think you give up. I mean, thank goodness John Lewis and Dr. King and others didn't give up on voting rights that took decades, if not a century, to get for African Americans. I don't think you ever give up. I think you continue to talk. I think you continue to put it at the top of the agenda understanding and knowing where the dynamics are on this, but don't give up. This Congress has got a year left in it. Midterms are coming up. The president is going to be in office for another 2 years after that, at least for another 2 years. So goodness gracious, let's don't give up hope. Let's just don't throw in the towel. People have come too far, and democracy right now is at stake, Joshua. We'll keep going, and we'll persevere, and sooner or later, I really believe sooner or later that things are going to happen good, and we're going to get some changes and stop what's been going on in partisan legislatures around this country.
Former Democratic Senator Doug Jones of Alabama. Sir, I appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will get more reaction to the president's remarks from one of the nation's top educators. Alberto Carvalho is finishing a long tenure in Miami. He's about to be the school superintendent in Los Angeles. What's his plan to keep students on track and safe from COVID? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. If you're a parent, you know that one of the most pressing concerns of this pandemic has been what to do with schools. Do we keep schools open? Do we mandate masks? How is this affecting students' learning, their social skills? Today, President Biden touted how far we've come since the beginning of the pandemic.
But let's put it in perspective. 95, as high as 98% of the schools in America are open, functioning, and capable of doing the job.
Last month, the Omicron variant began to threaten that progress. That includes in Los Angeles, where despite a nearly 10-fold increase in cases since before winter break, they returned to in-person classes last week. The rise in cases has taken a toll. Roughly 1/3 of the student body failed to show up, which seems to be part of a trend. Last fall, enrollment in the LA Unified School District declined by nearly 6%. So how do we reverse this trend? How do we get schools back on track? Joining us now is Alberto Carvalho, the longtime superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools in South Florida. He's set to become the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District next month with more than 400,000 students. Mr. Carvalho, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I appreciate the opportunity.
Could we start, first of all, with what I'm sure is going to be one of your big priorities going to LA, which is COVID. There's some research to suggest that the Omicron surge may be cresting and beginning to decline, depending on which research you check out. But even after Omicron is long gone, there's still the matter of getting kids back on track educationally and then doing all the other work that a school district has to do. So where do you plan to sink your teeth in first? Where do you begin the job, particularly dealing with COVID?
Well, let's first recognize that Los Angeles Unified School System has actually done remarkable work in terms of protective measures for the benefit of students, parents, the workforce, and the community at large. And that's verified based on the positivity rate inside schools, which is actually lower than a positivity rate in LA County. The mandatory vaccination protocols they have in place, in addition to baseline aggressive testing for both the workforce and students, has produced a condition of environment that is really protective of students. So I'm going to go into an environment where, quite frankly, the politics regarding health conditions is not an issue. In Los Angeles, it is guided by science, and their practices and policies are evidence of that. With that said, Joshua, look, we cannot let our guard down. Omicron has been a recent threat. It is about to plateau and then rapidly decline based on information out of South Africa and Israel and other nations. And we expect the same thing to happen here. But COVID is here to stay. There will be other variants. There will be other threats. So protective measures need to stay in place. We need to remain vigilant and continue to be courageous in adopting and implementing the protective measures that we have seen actually work.
You brought up the politics that you will be going out of and walking into. You are leaving a state, Florida, where they had banned mask mandates, into a district that set its own vaccine mandate, and into a state that is a vastly different political climate. How much do you think that will factor in terms of the work you do in LA versus just all of the other factors that will determine your success?
Well, Joshua, I think there's a great deal of parallel thinking and synchronicity as far as my own personal beliefs. I am a science-trained individual. who, quite frankly, over the past 2 years, has forced upon this community, in collaboration with our board, a set of protocols that absolutely follow science. I know that that invited some threats and potential consequences against my position and my salary and the salary of board members, because we put into place protective measures such as mandatory masking that were not in line with state pronouncements at that point. So my transition to LA is actually into an environment where the politics, the protective politics of health, which quite frankly should never be politicized for personal gain, are much more aligned with what I believe in and what actually science tells us than was the condition over the past 2 years here in the state of Florida.
What do you think are some of the top 1 or 2 things that you want to get done in LA to get students back on track, especially kids who may be English language learners, who may have different documentation statuses, different learning challenges? What do you want to do first?
Well, that's one of the, quite frankly, precedent-setting realizations that we have come to understand. There's that kids who were in crisis to begin with descended upon the deeper level of crisis. You're absolutely right. We're talking about kids in poverty, English language learners, students with disabilities. These students lost a lot of ground. Educationally speaking, that learning loss needs to be accelerated towards their full academic potential. That is the #1 priority. That's one that I'm going to emphasize from day one. In fact, from a distance, I've had a number of conversations with staff and members of the community about that critical priority. Secondly, you know, kids cannot learn if they're not in school, and right now we're dealing with an absenteeism crisis across America, not just in LA, Miami, across the country. And thirdly, we need to be prepared for the eventuality that we may need to pivot to a different modality of learning. Let's learn and put into play the issues that we quite frankly experienced over the past 2 years. We began to understand the potential, but also the detriments associated with virtual learning, distance learning. Let's perfect those. Let's continue to up the skill of our teaching workforce and our leadership for the eventuality that may come to us, like it or not. And I think that those are 3 critical priorities. Teach kids, accelerate their learning, make sure that they are in a protective environment in school, and last but not least, let's ensure that the systems we have in place are reflective of our learning over the past 2 years.
You know this very well from Miami. I grew up in South Florida, and the gap between the top income bracket and the bottom income bracket in Miami is horrifying in some places. What you can get educationally just based on the wealth of your parents is unjust. And I think one of the things you've been able to do in Miami is help close that gap quite a bit, where when you drive past a school in Liberty City or Overtown or, you know, Little Havana or wherever part of the city you're in, you can't just presume that the kids are or are not doing well, right, based on what the neighborhood is. How much of that is transferable to Los Angeles? You've got such an array of communities and nationalities and backgrounds there. How do you close some of those cultural gaps? Can you port anything over from Miami, or do you feel like you have to kind of start fresh and do some learning first?
Look, I think there are already some great practices in existence in LA, and there are some transportable, amplifiable, replicatable practices out of Miami. But look, let's be clear about one thing. All we need to know about how to teach Tyrone, Jose, Maria, or Johnny how to read, compute, is already known. This is hard work, but it is doable work. And it all relies on effective teaching, great leadership, support systems that transcend the classroom walls, actually address what you mentioned, which is the socioeconomic realities that kids in our communities face, tending to not only their academic needs, but also their mental health and social and emotional needs in environments where food insecurity is no longer a reality or a risk, where homelessness is addressed. That's exactly what we did in Miami. Schooling became a protective environment that transcended the schoolhouse. It actually went into the community with the support of community organizations, meeting students where they are and propelling them to where they need to be academically. And the result is a significant decrease in the achievement gaps as measured by proficiency in reading, language arts, mathematics, and graduation rates. Look, our graduation rates were just published a week ago. We got to 94% in Miami-Dade. In 2008, when this team began its work, it was 58%. The greatest jump in terms of graduation rates was observed with students of color, with poor students and students with disability, alongside students who are English language learners. So is it difficult? Yes. Is it realizable? Absolutely. Can it be done in the West Coast? Yes.
A few more things I would ask you before I let you go. President Biden gave a news conference today. He was asked about education and talked about the future of schooling, including during the pandemic. Here's part of what the president said. Watch.
We're not going back to closing schools. Schools should stay open because the American Rescue Plan, we provided to states $130 billion. $130 billion to keep our students and educators safe and schools open. Funding for ventilation systems in schools, social distancing, hygiene for classrooms and the school buses. In addition, we've added another $10 billion for COVID-19 tests to be able to be administered at schools. And many states and school districts have spent this money very well. Unfortunately, some haven't. I encourage the states and school districts that use the funding to protect our children and keep our schools open. Use it.
Mr. Carvalho, what is your sense in terms of where LA is standing in terms of what it needs to get back on its feet, to keep moving forward, versus what the president was talking about in terms of that federal support to keep schools open?
So we ought to give the administration a lot of credit for the investments that have been made in terms of ensuring a safe infrastructure, as the president spoke about, and new HVAC systems, ventilation systems, et cetera. The funding can also be used to address the issue I mentioned earlier regarding necessary academic acceleration. But look, there is a challenge that's seen in the West Coast and East Coast alike, which is in a tight job market as we are facing right now, hiring the qualified, certified professionals is difficult. So that is an ongoing challenge where we need counselors, school psychologists, social workers, special needs teachers to actually reduce the class sizes to inspire this acceleration of student achievement. But there is a workforce issue in the country right now. So you have the necessary financing. However, on the other end, because of private sector recruitment of the same type of talent, it is a challenge to hire the right people for the job. And look, I agree with the president. Closing schools should be the measure of last resort. We know the deleterious impact that closure of schools and social isolation has had on students. It was necessary at the time. Let's do all we can to not revisit that necessity.
One last thing before I let you go. I do not believe you'd be going to Los Angeles if you thought the job was a fixer-upper, right? At this stage in your career, with all the success you've had in Miami-Dade County, I've been there since, I believe, 2008, there's no point to make that kind of a move. New York tried to recruit you away. You decided to stay in Miami-Dade County, and now you're moving to this new endeavor. Before I let you go, I wonder how you feel about leaving behind Miami-Dade County. I mean, behind these kids, this district where you were kind of discovered as a young up-and-comer and pulled out of a school right up to district headquarters and ascended to superintendent, you got to be feeling a certain way about leaving these kids behind.
Listen, I hope I'm not leaving the kids behind. They're going to be left in good hands. The structures, the foundation, the conditions, academic performance, financial stability, having passed two referenda, one for school construction technology, another one for teacher salaries, catapulting teacher salaries by anywhere between 14 and 23%. Those are elements that are part of a legacy that's not going to go away. With that said, it is very emotional for me. It's been an emotional roller coaster to, after 14 years, have to say farewell. But in as much as I'm closing my chapter here in Miami and opening my heart to LA, my heart will never close to Miami. This is the community that made me. Listen, where else in the world could a guy go from being an undocumented, poor immigrant who was once homeless to the office of the superintendent blocks away from the bridge under which I slept? Only here. And I hope that my work will be remembered as that we empowered communities, we laid the groundwork for a successful future for our kids, and we painted a vision of what our beautiful new America can in fact be.
Alberto Carvalho is the outgoing superintendent in Miami-Dade County, Florida, on his way to LA Unified. Godspeed, Mr. Superintendent. Kids need good leaders, and I certainly wish you the best in LA. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Joshua.
Coming up, year one is just about done. We'll have more on what President Biden discussed in this evening's press conference. And later, a new Barbie doll is showcasing a woman who made history by writing it. You'll see how a figurine of journalist Ida B. Wells came to life. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is speaking now on Capitol Hill ahead of a number of votes, including some procedural moves intended to try and move these two voting rights bills forward. Neither one is expected to get very far. One is an effort to try to move forward these bills with just the majority of the Democrats. Then there will be another measure to try to change the rules and allow for a talking filibuster. Unclear what the path forward is on voting rights, but Senator Schumer has said leading up to tonight that he felt it was important to force everyone to get on the record about these bills, including the Republican lawmakers who thus far have opposed them, and also including Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who have said that they will not support changing the filibuster to move these bills and only these bills forward. After he's done speaking, we expect some of the voting to begin. We'll keep an eye on it, update you when we know more. It's one day before Joe Biden's first anniversary as president, and he did something today that he has rarely done as president. He held a press conference, a long one, nearly 2 hours in the East Room of the White House. Questions ranged from COVID to inflation to Russia, the opposition in Washington, and the future of his agenda. NBC's Carol Lee is in D.C. with the latest. Hey, Carol.
Joshua, the president made a number of headlines. If you just look at on the domestic front in terms of his legislative agenda, he said that he is willing to break up, Build Back Better, his big legislative package, into various pieces, and even conceded that it's unlikely that something like the child tax credit, which has been a point of contention even within the Democratic Party, with it not having support among all of the Democrats in the Senate, that's something that he said he's conceded may not wind up being in there, along with a community colleges provision, but that he is still going to push for what he called chunks of the Build Back Better plan to get passed through Congress this year.
And I've been talking to a number of my colleagues on the Hill. I think we can break the package up, get as much as we can now, and come back and fight for the rest later.
He also said he would be pushing for passing pieces of the voting rights legislation in various chunks, and saying that that's something that he is also could get behind this year, and also electoral reform. This is a bill that has bipartisan support. It's born out of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and he said that's something that he'd also take a look at, and he'll be reaching out to Republicans. He said on COVID that is one of his top priority, along with inflation. And on COVID, he said that, should he have gotten testing more, more tests sooner, which has been a criticism of this administration, that yes, he should have, but now he has a plan, and in year two, that things are going to get better, that it's not going to be like this.
We've been doing everything we can, learning and adapting as fast as we can. We're in a very different place now, though. We have the tools: vaccines, boosters, masks, tests, pills, to save lives and keep businesses and schools open.
On the foreign policy front, he had a big headline where he said he believes that Vladimir Putin will cross the border in Ukraine, that he has built it up so much that he has to do something as of now. He also said there's a little daylight between the U.S. and its European allies, particularly if Putin were to do something short of a full-scale invasion, what he called a mini or tiny crossing the border, and not necessarily going all the way in and taking over, say, the cities or something like that. That they're not fully on board with how the U.S. and its European allies would respond in terms of sanctions.
I want to be clear with you. The serious imposition of sanctions relative to dollar transactions and other things are things that are going to have a negative impact on the United States, as well as a negative impact on the economies of Europe as well. A devastating impact on Russia.
And just generally, Joshua, he said that he's going to make some changes himself this year, that he's going to get out in the country more, meet with Americans, look people in the eye, have face-to-face conversations, but also bring more people into the White House, people like from think tanks, editorial writers, and try to get a diversity of opinions. And he also said that he will be very involved in campaigning for lawmakers who are up this November in the midterm elections. Joshua?
Thank you, Carol. That's NBC's Carol Lee reporting from Washington tonight. Pop quiz. Who is depicted on the quarter? The answer is changing. A number of groundbreaking women are being honored on this coin, including Maya Angelou. We'll show you the others going into circulation just ahead. Stay close. U.S. currency says e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, the many who end up on our coins are getting more diverse with a new program from the U.S. Mint. This is the first coin in the American Women Quarters program. This is the tail side, depicting Maya Angelou lifting her arms to the sky with a bird behind her in flight. That's a callback to her iconic autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is the first time a black woman has been honored on the quarter. The other notable faces in the series are astronaut Sally Ride, Cherokee Nation Chief Wilma Mankiller, Nina Otero Warren, who was a pioneer in education and suffrage in New Mexico, and Anna Mae Wong, Hollywood's first Chinese-American movie star. Joining us now is Ventris C. Gibson, Deputy Director of the United States Mint. She is the first African-American to lead the Mint. Ms. Gibson, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Welcome and thank you.
So I've got one of the Maya Angelou quarters here. Wow. This is pretty.
Wow.
This is pretty cool. Yeah, like a Maya Angelou quarter. This is pretty cool. How did this come about?
It came about after consultation with the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative, the National Women's History Museum. We consulted with the Commission on Fine Arts, as well as consulted with family members, and it was reviewed by our Coinage Advisory Committee, and then ultimately selected and approved by Secretary Yellen.
Now, why a quarter as opposed to a penny or a dollar coin or any other, denomination of coin? Why a quarter?
Our history suggests that we depict on quarters and on half dollars and dollars these sorts of commemorative recognition of women and many others. So the quarter is widely utilized, is easily accessible to all, and more importantly, it really is large enough to depict such a miniature, for lack of a better word, artistic impression of the person we're honoring. And it's very clearly seen, as you can see, very detailed. And those stripes above Maya is the sunrise.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's really,
Yes, it
really
is.
gorgeous. Tell us about the other four women who will be depicted on these quarters. Dr. Sally Ride, Wilma Mankiller, Nina Otero Warren, Anna Mae Wong. How were they selected to be on the quarters?
These 5 women were selected after we opened a portal to the public and invited nominations. We received over 11,000 nominations. So it was important to consult with various women's organizations within the United States, of course, and our own advisory committees, and ultimately presenting those that should be recognized first out of the gate, these 5, to the Secretary for decision making.
We should note that these are 5 women from different cultures, different backgrounds.
Yes.
The coin for Nina Otero Warren on the back, it says "Voto para la mujer," vote for women. So this is an effort really to diversify who we not only see, but whose stories we learn, right?
This is significant, and the reason why, the significance of these 5 women, number one, they are pioneers, they're trailblazers. Number 2, they're recognized for significant accomplishments. And most importantly, they didn't accept the status quo. They, in fact, challenged the status quo. In the Maya Angelou, as an example, her rich history Here we're depicting where she received the Medal of Freedom from the President of the United States. And we as women can connect to these 5 women because the American Quarters program is designed to honor and recognize women from a diverse background. And these first 5 recognize the diversity.
With regards to these special forms of currency that are recognizing notable women, we asked our viewers who they would like to see on currency recognized. You can probably guess who the #1 name was that came up. Carol wrote Harriet Tubman and any of the women fighting for women's suffrage. Now, the Harriet Tubman 20, we should be clear, bills are not handled by the Mint. Bills are handled by the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which is part of the Treasury Department, but it's a different agency. So I understand that's not directly in your purview, but I do wonder what your sense is of the importance that people have put on these kind of commemorations, whether it's these quarters, being able to, spend Tubmans as 20s or anything else like that.
The importance is they bring such, first and foremost, these women contributed and other women that will be coming out. This is a 4-year program from 2022 to 2025, and we'll be recognizing 5 women in each of these years. And to the accomplishments that they've made, the building of this nation, the substance of this nation, and the essence of their accomplishments have made a difference in the lives of everyone, and more specifically women. And we need to pause and make sure that we're speaking to our young women and we're speaking to all women and men that these first 5 made significant contributions. And it is our honor at the Mint to honor them as contributors to our nation and the resilience of our nation.
Yeah, and I should note, by the way, that you don't just have to kind of wait and hope that you grab a Maya Angelou quarter. You can order a commemorative set of these or a commemorative kind of print of these quarters at usmint.gov. But before I let you go, I wonder what you expect in terms of the numismatic community, the people who collect coins for both scholarship and for value. Do you expect that one day this quarter will be worth more than 25 cents?
Well, I can't predict the future, but I can tell you that our numismatic community they're excited about this coin. They're excited about the coin board that will ultimately contain all 5 women and over the 2022 to 2025. So stay tuned as we look to whether this has more of a monetary value in the future. But right now, 25 cents is 25 cents.
But oh, the value of these 25 cents. I really love this quarter.
Oh, the value, yes.
I love it. It's so wonderful. Ventura C. Gibson from the U.S. Mint, I appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
And thank you for taking the time to recognize these women. And if you don't mind, I just want to thank the 1,700 nearly we have U.S. Mint employees who brought this to life and made it possible. For sure, for sure. If nothing else is their legacy, this is one heck of a legacy. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good evening. Now, it's not just the U.S. Mint honoring trailblazing Black women. Wait till you see the latest Barbie doll. Mattel is putting some inspiring women on store shelves. The latest honoree's great-granddaughter joins us before we go. So we just showed you the new quarter honoring Maya Angelou, one in a commemorative series of 5. But Ms. Angelou, Dr. Angelou, has also been made into a signature Barbie doll. It was part of Mattel's Inspiring Women collection. And now that collection has a new addition. Ida B. Wells. She was a journalist, a suffragist, and an anti-lynching activist. Ida B. Wells was born into slavery in 1862 during the Civil War. In 2020, the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded her a special citation. The award celebrated her investigative reporting on lynchings of Black Americans. She fought for equality at a time when being a female journalist of color was rare at best, but her legacy goes farther than her work. Let's bring in someone with a personal connection to this new Barbie doll. Michelle Duster is the great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells. She's also a public historian and the author of Ida B. the Queen, The Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells. Ms. Duster, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me, Joshua.
Talk about how this doll came about and how you worked with Mattel on it.
Well, I can tell you my involvement. I was approached by Mattel with the idea of creating a doll, and I was amazed and just so honored that they would consider creating a doll in her honor. And I was involved with the development of the doll along with my brother Dan. And we were incredibly, we had a lot of input into a lot of details about her, her hairstyle, her dress, the fact that she has the Memphis Free Speech, which was the newspaper that she edited and co-owned in Memphis, and the background that you see in the packaging. We had some input into that. So we really worked to make sure that within the realm of dolls, that she could be as accurate and historically based as possible.
Now, on one hand, part of me, if I had heard this, would be like, oh, a Barbie doll. The other part of me would have been like, oh, a Barbie doll? Like, were you fully on board with this from the beginning, or was there a little bit of concern that, like, what is this finna be?
Well, I mean, there actually have been several other products that have been created around my great-grandmother's legacy. And for Barbie to make this decision just makes it to a very broad audience. And hopefully young girls all the way to, you know, older women will be inspired by this doll. And not only enjoy the doll, but also learn about the life and legacy of my great-grandmother, who you mentioned was a suffragist and a journalist, a pioneer. She spoke truth to power, and she used her voice in journalism to impact change.
Now, talk to people who may not be familiar with her. I think for black journalists, especially journalists who trained at historically black colleges and universities, Ida B. Wells is a name we've heard a lot. Nicole Hannah-Jones from the New York Times, her name on Twitter is Ida Bay Jones, so your great-grandmother has a legacy here. But for people who maybe have never heard of her, what was it about her journalism that stood out? Was it just the subject matter? Was it the way she reported? Talk to people who may not be familiar with her.
Well, one of the things that I tried to do in my book, Ida B. the Queen, was to help people understand why she was such a pioneer. Not only was she a writer, but she was an owner of a newspaper, which was extremely rare for Black women. And then when it came to writing, she chronicled the realities of what was going on regarding lynching. And so she was a pioneer in what is called data journalism today, where she wrote down names, dates, locations, reasons that were behind lynching. So she basically, created almost in her day, like a database to show that lynching that was taking place was a way to terrorize the African American community versus being used as a real sort of way to punish people for a crime.
I know I got to let you go in a second, but I wonder how you feel about just using a toy as a way into talking about this history. We've been having some really intense conversations in the last few years about how we talk about Black history through the whole debate over critical race theory and so on. And it seems like this might be a way to introduce kids to what is really a very serious, intense legacy in kind of a softer, accessible way.
Absolutely. I mean, my great-grandmother was a pioneer. She was, a journalist, and she wrote about very difficult topics. There was a lot of violence that took place during her lifetime, and she wrote about it in order to shame the United States into doing the right thing. And she was countering false narratives at that time. But she also was a suffragist, and she was a social worker. She had multiple sort of chapters of her life. And hopefully, through the doll, people will become interested in learning about her. And I have written 2 books, Ida B. the Queen, as well as Ida B. Wells' Voice of Truth, which can give people more information about who she was and what she did, and why she is important for people to be inspired by and learn from.
I know we asked our viewers who they would like to see commemorated in a Barbie, and one Twitter user, Hey Nav, wrote, "Oh, so many women deserve it. Where do we start?" I hear that, but I wonder, before I have to let you go, just what was your first reaction when you finally saw the figurine for the first time? What did you think of it?
mean, it made it come true. I mean, I had seen, PDFs all along the stage of the production, but actually holding it in my hand was like, wow, this is really happening. It's beautiful, and hopefully it will be an entree to some to learn about her for the first time. And for those who are familiar with her, having the doll like on their desk right next to their computer will be inspiring and motivating to know they can make an impact just like she did.
Michelle Duster, I appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, before we go, one more honor to note for a pioneer who recently passed. The lights on Broadway are dimmed tonight in honor of Sidney Poitier. The actor, director, and activist died on January 6th. He lived to be 94. Sidney Poitier debuted on Broadway back in 1946 in the Greek comedy Lysistrata. He returned in '59 for his leading role in A Raisin in the Sun. Mr. Poitier reprised that role on film, and soon after his performance in Lilies of the Field, that made him the first black man to win the Oscar for Best Actor. But Broadway may not be done with Mr. Poitier just yet. There is a play in the works about his life. Sidney will follow his early years in the Bahamas through his rise to stardom. Mr. Poitier's best-selling autobiography, The Measure of a Man, is the source material. No word so far on when it will premiere. Thank you for making time for us. Come on back tomorrow and do bring a friend. Remember, we're on social at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.